All right, how's everybody doing tonight? Welcome back to a comic book team up with myself and John's Longbox. Tonight we have Sean here from Blackjack Comics or Blackjack Press. I'm not entirely sure which one it is. He has a bunch of digital comics that we're going to take a look at tonight and introduce you to if you don't know about them. So, Sean, what we usually do is we just like to talk comics. John and I are, that's all we like to do. So, let's start off by you giving introduction to everyone here that's listening about who you are and what your comics are about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sean Fahey, the editor of Blackjack Press and kind of primary writer of a lot of our books, started making comic books back in 2007. We started with an anthology series called Tall Tales from the Badlands, which was a Western series. From there, graduated to Sagas of the Northmen, which is our Viking anthology. Those were both black and white series. We wanted to do something color after that, so we moved to Dark Matter, which was a horror science fiction anthology, and then finally wanted to do a kind of an original graphic novel. Not move away from anthologies, although I plan on doing some anthology stuff in the future. And that was River of Blood, which is our most recent book, which is a kind of a Viking horror, Lovecraftian, Robert E. Howard, Mike Mignola inspired standalone story about a group of Varangian Guard mercenaries who have to flee Constantinople after their leader is framed for murder. They start working their way back up the Volga River through medieval Russia, and along the way, encounter a lot of kind of supernatural creatures and some mysteries. I don't want to give away the entire book because there's a twist about midway through. But if you're a fan of the book Eaters of the Dead or Heart of Darkness or The Odyssey, it draws a lot on those types of stories to tell kind of just a good high adventure medieval supernatural romp. So that's the 60-second version, which probably ran for about 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's fine. That looks awesome.
I'm really a big fan of, and I always say this wrong, but Mignola's Farfel and the Grey Mouser, which I find is a beautiful book. And I think you're taking some inspiration in the art direction here, especially with the fantasy, because he does some beautiful stuff with simplistic fantasy art in that book, if you ask me.
Yeah. Are you the artist?
So no, I wish I could draw that good. So the artist for this book is Carlos Trigo, he's a Spanish artist, and the covers are by Jacques, who's an Argentinian artist and colorist. I wrote the book.
Okay, because this you said everything that got my attention: Vikings, Lovecraft, Mignola. This looks awesome. RJ always finds such stuff that I never knew. I'm so glad he finds. This looks great.
Just for everybody in the chat, just to let you know, link is in the description for where you can pick these up online. It is drivethroughcomics.com. So if anybody is looking for these books that we're going to be
I'll put it in www.drivethroughcomics.com.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, so we do digital through drive-through, and then if you're old-fashioned like me and you just like holding the paper, our hard copies are available through Indie Planet.
Oh, and I got to say, Indie Planet does great work. I just got these from Brian Bowes. These were published by Indie Planet. These are great. So I'll be looking up. These were all from Batsy. This has nothing to do with Sean's comic, but it was published through Indie Planet. They do great work. I was reluctant because I thought it was not going to be high quality, but I was 100% pleased to be 100% wrong. So I will be looking up your comics because I'm an old school guy. I got to have comics in my hand. They look good. So
they do a great job. We've done every single one of our books through them. So 6 books so far. They've done a fantastic job on all the books. Anytime I have the slightest issue at all, their customer service is fantastic.
Oh,
they will just reprint and send the books right back with the smallest issue. So can't say enough great things about the folks at Kablam / Indie Planet.
So are they print on demand?
They are.
That's really good. So just to give our listeners a little bit of a context here. I'm looking at the books, and I think they're about say PDF is $4.99 for Saga of the Northman. I think Blackjack Comics was $9.99. They have it on sale right now at drive-through. What are the prices for um, your actual physical comics?
So the physical copies are, I'd have to pull up Indie Planet. If I remember, River of Blood is about $15, and the other ones range around the $5 to $7.50 range.
Okay, so you got a wide range of page count as well.
Yeah, some of them are a little bit longer than others. River of Blood is about twice the size of the anthology books. And then color obviously is more expensive to print.
Right, because Sagas of the Northman is black and white.
Yeah.
And I'm not showing too much of the books tonight. I'll be showing you the covers, but just to let everyone know, Sean did send me access to the PDFs of these. They look beautiful in the inside.
I just ordered Saga of the Northman #1 on Indie Planet because that's the way I am.
Well, thank you.
Mm. So, Sean, how'd you get into publishing comics? Just to let you know, we are both writers here, so no artists in this group, just all writers. We, John and I, both publish our own stuff through. Well, John does Fund My Comic, and I do through Indiegogo.
Yeah, I don't think my story is any different than most other folks. I mean, I grew up in a family of readers and cinephiles, and we kind of had a habit growing up of seeing movies on Saturdays and then going as a family to get a meal afterwards and kind of deconstructing stories and characters, and so was always into the mechanics of storytelling even from a very young age, and just loved telling stories and loved comic books, and around 2007-ish, got to the point where I wasn't seeing a whole lot on the stands of the type of stories I wanted to read. I was a big fan of books like 100 Bullets, Queen and Country, the Hellboy stuff. But beyond that, wasn't seeing a whole lot of the type of stories I like to read. There weren't a lot of Westerns on the stands. And so I thought that, I think like a lot of folks, you have a burning desire to tell stories and then kind of a put up or shut up mentality of, all right, if you're not seeing the type of things that you want to see on the stands, well, then, become a member of that community and contribute to the commerce of that industry and see what happens. So I started with the one genre that I was seeing the least amount of comic book coverage on, which was the Westerns. It's a film genre, and it's a genre of literature that I absolutely love. So started with that. Have always loved Vikings and kind of the sagas, the Icelandic sagas, and kind of moved on to that next. And I mean, who is not a fan of horror and sci-fi? So that became a natural point to move into after sagas. And then River of Blood was kind of a marriage of a lot of influences of kind of the Viking, the barbarian, the horror, the supernatural, kind of bringing it all together in one and kind of challenging myself to see if I could do a standalone original graphic novel and get beyond the 8 to 10 page count and do something more long form.
It's funny. I think your stuff, well, first of all, I think it has a cinematic view to it, just as you're talking about, but this would be really good for anthology books like Anvil Press. I have a story that was published, I think, in Anvil Press #2, because I do Crom the Destroyer, which is basically me channeling, wanting, like you say, good Conan stories. And so it's a standalone barbarian story with a couple of pieces of art, but they also publish small comics, 8 pages, things like that. It's in a magazine that comes out. So your stuff there are a number of those kind of anthologies out there right now. So those are the kinds of things that I am attracted to, and what attracted me to your stuff here, because it looks like something that you would get from Anvil Press.
I appreciate that.
I'm looking at Indie Planet right now. I'm looking at your comics. I just bought Redlands 1 and 2. It's reasonable price too. For anybody who's on the wavering line, you can. I just picked up Saga of the Northmen and Tales from Badlands 1 and 2, and I think I'm at $13 right now. Dude, that's cheaper than most people's regular one issue comic these days.
Yeah, and so that's very much a conscious decision. I mean, we're not going to get rich doing this. Blackjack Press is yeah. It's a passion project, and this was very much about getting the material out there at the lowest possible price point I can. To be honest, I think that first issue, I'd have to check the numbers again, but I think that first issue of Tall Tales from the Badlands is a penny more than it costs to print, and it only because Indie Planet will not let you price it below what the actual physical production cost is.
They got to make a profit too.
Yeah. So,
but $2.99. I mean, if you don't mind me saying this, I picked up Saga of the Northmen print on demand for $6.99. Tales of the Badlands print on demand for $2.99. Geez, $2.99. Because I wanted to make my comic, and I was told not to say cheap. I was told to make my comic as affordable as possible, and it's $10.
Yeah,
and I'm still taking a beating on it. You know what I mean? So I don't know how $2.99. Good for you, man. All I can. Are you doing good numbers?
We do. When we do our Kickstarters, we do good numbers on that. And when I actually have the time to get out to cons, we do good numbers on that.
Oh, good for you.
But kind of the day-to-day, like, do I see a lot of sales on an average Wednesday? No, I don't. And like part of that is that I'm the worst marketer and the worst social media manager in the history of social media managers. Like, I don't do that piece very well at all. Kickstarter's been really good to us, and like I said, the cons, we tend to do pretty well at that. But the day-to-day digital sales, I don't see a lot there.
Now, you said you're not very good. Are you uncomfortable on camera? I get this a lot. I'm a chatterbox. I'll talk to anybody.
Right.
Camera on or off, I'll talk to anybody. But a lot of us are. When I say us, I mean us comic book people aren't too comfortable talking.
Yeah, no, I'll talk to anyone at any point in time. I've done a couple of these in the past. I enjoy doing it, and I really, really appreciate the opportunity that you guys have given me to come and talk about it today. I think I guess, how do I put it this way? It's very time consuming to do the social media thing and build up an audience. And I've got a family, I've got a day job, like most folks, and so it becomes kind of a time management trade off. And I don't think I'm good at creating kind of the daily product that a lot of folks do that have large followings. It's a skill set that I don't have. Folks are very good about getting artwork out there, getting previews, teasers. You look at good websites and good Facebook pages, good Twitter pages. Folks are very good about how they stagger stuff out. I am trying to get better at that. I'm trying to have a more consistent presence, not just when we launch a Kickstarter, but kind of the before and after as well. And so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, I'm not joking. For almost 3 years, it was just me talking to nobody until RJ, for whatever strange reason, took a liking to me, and he's the one that really blew up my channel. So I'm always going to be thankful to RJ. So yeah, it's tough. There's no easy way to do it. There's no it's just beating the path. Gotta get out there, get your comic out there. Do you go to conventions? You said, right?
Yeah, I try to when I can squeeze the time in, and those are always good experiences. Just actually physically meeting people and physically face to face having an opportunity to talk comics and what folks' interests are, and kind of selling the book that way. Again, I'm not a great digital salesperson. I much prefer the face to face. But I will say that I think Kickstarter is a great platform, and they've done right by Blackjack Press.
Oh, that's good. That's good. when you go to conventions, like what do you get a booth, you get a table, you get and you're out there. Hey, how you doing? You want to buy a comic book?
Yeah,
because I haven't done that yet, so I'm just so curious how that is.
Yeah, usually like kind of an artist alley type table, and just set up our modest little booth and do the carnival barker routine, and try not to be too annoying, but just make eye contact with someone. Hey, do you like Viking stories? Do you like westerns? Yes, no, okay.
Because they like comics,
Yeah, so you don't have to ask that question. Do you like comics? But it's not everyone likes westerns. Not everyone likes barbarian Viking stories. Not everyone likes horror. Some folks are there just for the superhero stuff, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, there's room enough for all genres, all types. And so kind of my shtick is, you make eye contact with someone. Do you like westerns? Do you like Viking stories? Yes, no. And then, from there, start a conversation.
Well, it worked. I just bought your entire catalog as we were talking.
I appreciate that.
You'll see some bells and whistles go off, but I'm an easy sell. Don't get too carried away. Comic books, yes, please.
Did I get that Dark Matter page right? It didn't look like Blackjack Press, but what if I put up Dark Matter in the background?
Yeah, it didn't look like it. If you go to the drive-through page, that's just the Blackjack Press. It'll have all of the comics listed there.
I'm just going to share my screen whenever you want, but this is everything on Indie Planet. This is everything that I bought. If ever you want to, but I'm not. Yeah, so this is your available offerings on Indie Planet. I searched your name in this area, so I just went bing, 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 but picked them all up.
Wow, I really appreciate it.
I got a problem, Sean. Next week on Comic Book Team Up, it's an intervention. We're going to have all my friends, my wife, my sisters, my brothers telling me, you got to stop buying comic books.
Sean, if you don't know anything about John, he's sitting in his basement right now, which is wall-to-wall comics, just comics everywhere. He's
Fantastic.
got a beautiful setup.
My spinner rack over there behind me is my comic book room. Yeah.
I always thought I had a large collection. I had about 33,000. John has about 10 times more comics than I do.
Not 10, but I'm up to 58,000. So Sean, you mentioned some really good comics in that you said like 100 Bullets. You like?
Yep.
Did you read like was it Brian Wood's Northman and?
Oh God, yeah.
What about like Rebels and things like that? Like, so
I read Rebels as well. So what was it? I think it was Northlanders. I believe was
Northlanders. Yes, your Saga of the Northman. Yeah, Northlanders was one of the best comics I ever read. I that was the first Viking comic I ever read. It just struck with me, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm so glad other people are doing Viking stuff. I know the Brett Weisers and Kelsey Shannon have a comic called Nora's Saga. A girl from modern times. She falls into the ice, goes under the river, and she gets rescued by Vikings. So she's a modern girl with a cell phone in the Viking. It's so good. I love all the Viking stuff. So I appreciate that you're doing this. I'm a board gamer. It seems like 2 years ago, every board game was about Vikings. So like, there was a big surge in Viking popularity. So I'm so glad. When I saw this image, I was like, I wasn't even listening to you and RJ talking. I was going to Indie Planet. And
I appreciate it. To your point, I absolutely loved Northlanders, and I'm very appreciative that Vertigo allowed Brian Wood. It seemed like I don't know. I was never part of the conversations, but it seemed like he was able to tell the kind of stories that he wanted to, and they stuck with it for a long time. I mean, they let him do a standalone issue simply about how Vikings fought man-to-man kind of manual combat. Like I remember it was full of like geometry and different angles and kind of the pounds per square inch of an axe coming down. And it was just one issue about that. And there was there was an issue, I think it was a standalone issue as well about the raid on one of the first raids on Lindisfarne, the monastery, and there's just some beautiful imagery there. There's a young boy that's in the village when the raiders come, and the story ends, and he is now a member of the the tribe of Vikings. It's just a beautiful story with some beautiful imagery, and he was able to do that over and over again. And yeah, I don't know. I really don't know why there's not more comics like that. Like Northlanders. There's so many different periods. It's not just Vikings. I mean, there's so many different periods where you could do something like that. You could do a Roman type comic that's like Northlanders. You could do a heliocentric or a Hellenistic rather type model, involving ancient Greece. I mean, you could do one about medieval knights. Just those kind of those periods of time lend themselves a lot to all different kinds of storytelling and characters and different angles that you could take. So I love that book. It's probably one of my favorite. Absolutely,
it is a good book. RJ, you would love it. Yeah. There was a couple like Chuck Dixon for CrossJed did a comic called Braith, and it was,
I remember that.
Yeah, it was like Celts versus Romans, but it was set in this CrossJed and other Earth, which to me took away from the comic.
I totally agree.
I totally agree. He just ignored that it was a fabricated planet and made it as close to real history as possible. You know what I mean? But I love that stuff. I would love pirate comics, flat out. Do you need to know the historic period to enjoy this comic?
No, absolutely not. I would say that if I, and I'll just say this about myself, I won't say it about other writers. If I write a comic book story that takes place, it is a period piece, and it requires you to have intimate knowledge about that period, then I have failed as a storyteller and a writer. So I have endeavored, and the other writers of this series have endeavored to tell stories first that focus on good characters that just happen to take place in a particular period of time.
Well, I agree completely. I think, what I usually do, I'm very much into basically the Robert E. Howard way of telling a story. My Crown the Destroyer is like his Conan the Barbarian. It's set in a fantasy world, which is basically the prehistory of Europe. What he did was he took every great civilization of Europe and he stuck it into one map, right? So you got your Greeks in one place and your Romans in the other and your Norsemen in another, and then you got the Egyptians, all that kind of stuff. So I did the same thing in my own kind of world. And I remember when I was doing so there's basically a band of collected warriors, and one of them was a Viking. And I said to myself, the easiest way and the best way to access these ideas is to me to grab what quite honestly was a children's book about Vikings. And, some of them got beautiful art, but the simplicity of how they explain things, and it's like, this is how you need to introduce something and introduce it into a comic so that everybody can have access to it. That's the way that I like to do my research and the way that I like to introduce, because basically they're background characters, but at the same time, you got to get everything right. I'm sure my artists really hate me because I have two beautiful artists, Jim O'Reilly and Nick Axe, and I'm always sending them, historical references saying, make my characters look like this.
Well, I think artists like that, they want reference, especially somebody who's taking it seriously as a career. They don't want to get made fun of or have their work dismissed because, they drew, the wrong things. We all have the Vikings with horns, but we all know the Vikings really didn't have horns. Right. You know what I mean? So we want to, I think anyway, the artists appreciate, I know that's what Chuck Dixon says, that I follow him, and he says as much reference as possible so the artists could, get it right. Do you find that, Sean? Do your artists want to strive for realism?
Yeah. So I think, the artists that I've worked with like reference, but you want them to be able to express themselves as well. So, you provide reference as a solid foundation and a starting point. With respect to something like Sagas of the Northmen, all the artists stayed pretty consistent with some exceptions with the references that were provided, just because it made sense. With something like River of Blood, there was more deviation because it was more fantasy than historical. I mean, you did have the Varangian Guards; that was actually an actual military force. Basil was the emperor of the Byzantine Empire and Constantinople. These things did happen. Those people did exist. But this story is not grounded in his, like, firmly rooted in history. History is a launching point for kind of the fantasy horror elements from it. And so Carlos had some reference to work with in the beginning, but we agreed very early on that we were going to take liberties with it, that to the extent that it made sense for the story and for the characters.
So, are your books like fantasy historical? Like, will the Vikings meet like Krakens and stuff like that, or is it pure history?
So Sagas of the Northmen is pretty firmly rooted in reality in this world. And so let me put it this way: there's a story in there that about the first raid on Lindisfarne that uses that represents an actual manuscript from a monk that was there during the raid. But
monkeys can't write, so this has to be fantasy.
There's a story about Leif Erikson, his first journey west. There's a story about Leif Erikson's sister that a lot of people don't know about, Freydis, who also made a journey west into to North America. So, and then there are some that are all the characters are completely made up, but they touch on aspects of Viking and Nordic culture, like the Viking burial ritual. Yeah.
Did you read Age of Bronze? Image Comics had a comic called Age of Bronze.
Yeah, about the Iliad, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, yeah. It was the Iliad. Yeah, duh.
Yeah, it was, if I remember, yeah.
They removed all fantasy. Like, he tried to make it, if it really happened, this is how it would be.
Right.
Like, so they removed all the gods and monsters and made it like, I think that would make a wonderful Netflix show. Like, keep it as realistic. So that was set in ancient Greece. There was a wonderful 3-issue series just called The Three, and it was about Heliots. I think that was the word. They were the Spartan slaves who revolted against the Spartans, and it turned out nobody else joined. It was just those three. So they had to three against Sparta. Kind of. It was a really good historically based. I don't know if it's a real story, but I'm with you. I really like historical based comics. There's so few of them that when it happens, it's an event. I'm trying to think of other historical like Brian Wood. He had that DMZ. That's how I found him. That, to me, that was his worst comic, the Demilitarized Zone.
Right. The Civil War, the kind of the modern age Civil War.
Yeah. I that was kind of hard, but I liked his characters and characterization, so that's what kept me reading it. And then Northlanders and Rebels, and then he got canceled, and nobody would hire him for years. And I think he's finally coming back.
Okay, which is great. I mean, Northlanders is one of my absolute favorite series of all time. So hopefully he does come back and do something along those lines. So, but to put a fine point on your question, John, like distinguishing the two Viking books. So Sagas of the Northmen would be one for folks that enjoy the historical aspect of Vikings and kind of Nordic, the Icelandic sagas and those type of tales, right? Again, there's historical figures in those some of those stories, stories about those historical figures, whereas in River of Blood is more of a work of fantasy that just happens to involve some Vikings in it.
Oh, cool. So, but best of both worlds there.
Yeah,
it's if I'm working on a comic, Heroic Tales, it's flat out superheroes, Bronze Age superheroes, and if I do well enough that I could start funding other projects, I do want to have a horror comic set in Roman occupied Britain. There's a reason why they're building a wall up there. There's something horrible on the other side of the wall. That's the premise. But the average person doesn't know. Think of some Lovecraftian thing, and they're basically making a magic circle because you don't want to go up there. And I'm going to make jokes that it's Scottish people, but these picks or whatever, we got to contain them for the sake of humanity.
I mean, there's a lot of material to mine there with Hadrian's Wall and Roman Britain. There's one of the projects that I'm working on that I just started recently is about the Roman occupation of Germany and the aftermath of the Teutoburg Forest massacre.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and it focuses on, there are supernatural elements of it, but it's more of a Roman history meets the Punisher type story.
That's awesome.
It's about a survivor of the Teutoburg Forest who he leads out about 100 survivors, and then what happens a couple of months afterwards as this person
is an awesome idea. That you just
trying to track down the people that betrayed the three legions.
That is awesome. I'm trying to think of like a funny Roman, like Punish Us or something like that, you know, with Punisher, but with the US at the end, like the Roman. That is an awesome idea. Dude, if you make that comic and if it's half as good as the premise, you know, that should be a movie. You know, like I sometimes I hear comic book ideas. I'm like, dude, that should be like they're making these Predator movies. Somebody was just like a Predator in feudal Japan. Samurais are fighting. I'm like, go make that movie, that movie. And then I said, Cowboys versus a Predator. Go, you know, and then somebody, like, it was a big thread, Romans versus a Predator. You know what I mean? And instead they're remaking all the same 5 movies over and over again, you know. But that a survivor in the Teutoburg Forest, that's just like, that's it. I'm killing every damn German I can find. That is awesome. I'm legitimately excited for that.
Well, I'll send you a copy, John.
Oh, yeah. Oh man, that is awesome. What do you RJ, do you like historically based comics? I know RJ and I both like superheroes, but there's room for everything, you know.
Yeah. Funny enough, again, my first degree was in history, John, but I would rather the fantasy element be in there. I was just saying to someone the other day about Troy, the movie, and I was saying, but they took out all the supernatural elements of it. I would rather the supernatural
they took
elements.
out all the good stuff and changed. I hate that. Stick to it. If you're gonna make something based on something, commit to the bit or make something new. You know, Achilles died in Rome. There you go. It's a freaking spoiler for a 3,000-year-old story. Brad Pitt doesn't get to live because he's Brad Pitt. I was like enraged at the end of that movie. You know,
but you know, I was going to say also, there's a couple of Robert E. Howard stories about the kind of thing that you were talking about, John, with the Celts. I can't remember the Book of the Worm or something like that, where he follows Celts being basically tortured by Roman citizens, if I remember correctly, as they were taking over. Anyways, but yeah, there is stories like that. I would gravitate towards the Conan the Barbarian rather than stories like that. You know, I always love the fact that you have your fantasy elements in it, because I love the visual spectacle. And it's one of the things about comics that I always love is the visual spectacle. But listening to people like when I talked to Chuck Dixon, and he's talking about the fact that, you know, if I had to write war comics for the rest of my life, he said, I'd be happy. You know, and that's the thing. You have people who really, really love this history and the genre that they're playing in with their comics, and they make spectacular comics that way.
Yeah, I mean, if I could, if in a perfect world, if I could make comic books and make a living and retire from my job, I would write superhero comics if given one choice. I mean, granted, I have Western ideas. I have a whole bunch. But if the all powerful being was like, you could retire, you could quit, you could pay all your bills, make a comic, but you only have one genre, it would be superhero comic. What about you, Sean? In the same ridiculous scenario, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I could pick one genre, so let me list first the ones that really interest me. So I love crime noir. I love Westerns.
Okay.
And I love kind of what I will call kind of barbarian fantasy type genre. So like comics that I liked, I loved Mike Grell's Warlord growing up.
Yeah.
I loved Marvel's Conan series, and then when Dark Horse bought it and Kurt Busiek was doing it, that was amazing. And I'm reading it now. Jim Zub's running on a Titan. I love Conan.
I'm missing issue number 1. I think I have 2 to 11, and I can't read it until I get issue number 1. It's right there, and it's killing.
Yeah, no, I trust me, I understand. So, you know, and I loved war. Like I love Sergeant Rock was a big kind of The Losers, Haunted Tank. Like I go back and buy old.
What about
stuff.
Jonah Hex?
Jonah Hex was great. And
yeah, I am so well. I'm actually happy. I wouldn't touch Jonah Hex with a 10-foot pole as a kid because I wanted superheroes. I wanted guys with laser beams throwing tanks and fighting, whatever. And Jonah Hex was sitting there on the rack, and I went right past it. But now I'm collecting it. I think it would have been Pearls Before Swine if I picked it up as a kid because it is so good.
Yeah,
it is so good. I really enjoy it. So I picked up that Spectacular, the last Jonah Hex story, just because I was like, yeah, why not? And it was so. I don't want to spoil that, but I did a video on that. Oh my god! So now I went back and I'm literally getting the old first appearances of Jonah Hex and reading them in chronological order. It's almost to me like DC at the time was a schizophrenic company making these like adult, but in the best sense of the world, not in the pornographic sense, adult comics like these Sergeant Rocks and these weird westerns and old war comics and Jonah Hex, and then Superman like, oh geez, my cape turned yellow. Now I have to fly to Jupiter and fix it. You know what I mean? Like they were pandering to kids over here, and then not pandering, making all ages in the best sense of the world comics over here.
Right.
So I always said I hated Silver Age DC. I stand corrected. I'm loving Silver Age DC, but the Western war, more realistic stuff.
Yeah, so that's kind of more not that I dislike superhero comic books, because there's room for everything. One of my absolute all-time favorite books is Darwin Cook's New Frontier. I absolutely love that. Yeah, I absolutely love that. But interestingly enough, my favorite part of that book is the prologue with the losers. But I love the entire book. But the genres I kind of gravitate towards are the noir type, the crime type, war, Western, and kind of fantasy. So I'm being long-winded, John, to answer your question.
I'll be as long-winded as you want, man. Shut me up. I talk too much.
If I could only pick one to work in, what would it be? It would probably be the kind of fantasy barbarian type. So that was the last book that I did, River of Blood. The next one is going to be in that genre as well. And if I could only pick one, it would probably be that genre.
It's funny. I was just mentioning this a couple of weeks ago. I don't remember if it was with you or not, John, but we could live in an entirely different timeline if something very small had happened back in the late 80s, because Arnold Schwarzenegger was prepared to do a Sergeant Rock movie. They even had promo material out for it. They had the script written, and they started to shoot it, or wanted to shoot it, in a location that he didn't want to go to. And so they canceled the entire thing. We could live in an entirely different world where that was the first real superhero movie that would come out and start a universe. And we could have, Sergeant Rock and the real Nick Fury and all that kind of stuff.
And a good Jonah Hex movie.
Yeah, a real Jonah Hex movie.
I mean, the Jonah Hex movie, I like the casting, and I even I didn't like that they gave Jonah Hex superpowers, but they gave him a cool superpower. Like if they had given that power to somebody else in a different movie, you're like, oh, that was pretty cool. He could pull up the dead and ask them questions. What does that have to do with Jonah Hex? But again, commit to the bit. You want to make a movie, and then they were embarrassed that he was a Confederate soldier. He's a Confederate soldier. Just deal with it. Right. I know it's not politically correct these days, but whatever. Don't make the movie then. Like, what's next? They're gonna make a Punisher who's a pacifist.
I don't know, John. They're talking about making Halo without guns. I think it is.
Oh, really? You know what? It's so I must have a problem because if I don't like something, I just cut it out of my life. I don't hate watching and talk about it.
I agree.
It's just not even there. Like there's so much like people fighting on the internet because this guy said this. I'm like, well, you know what? If you didn't have the internet, you wouldn't know. So just go about your life as if you didn't hear it. And
that's why we got Sean on here tonight, because there is good stuff out there. You don't have to wade through crap in order to find something at your comic book store anymore. There's good books out there, indie books. Yeah, like Sean stuff.
I really appreciate you guys having me on. And if I could flip the script and maybe ask you guys a couple of questions.
Sure.
Yeah. So
I'm married. I'm flattered, but thank you.
So there seems to be. so Jim Zub's Conan the Barbarian is incredibly popular. I mean, it's every issue's selling out, going to like 5, 6 printings. You've got a lot of indie success, or small press success with some fantasy and barbarian stuff. I mean, Headlopper was very, very popular, and Barbarian Lord, and some of these other books. So I won't use the word resurgence, but there's kind of a healthy market, it seems, for these fantasy barbarian type books. What do you guys think makes a good fantasy barbarian book? Fantasy barbarian comic book?
What I always talk about is return to form for low fantasy. You got to go back to the basics of low fantasy, because that's what the barbarian book is about. You know, you want high fantasy, go imitate Tolkien or someone like that. You want low fantasy, you got to do it the way that my pattern is always Robert E. Howard. You know, it's a giant world that this person exists in, and he's a fly speck in this entire thing. Sometimes, like, I mean, some of those Conan stories, as I always say, like Across the Black River, I think it starts out with Conan and you think it's going to follow him, and it doesn't. It follows the guy he meets up with, and this guy, you know, has a last stand, saving basically homesteaders, right? And Conan's a secondary character in a Conan story because it's the world, you know, and it's this giant world that you don't have to explain the whole thing. It's there, and it's as real as the world around us because it's so expansive. And that's, for me, is the return to form for low fantasy. And that's why I think people are looking for low fantasy, not high fantasy anymore. Not that there's anything wrong with Tolkien, but people want nitty gritty low fantasy as far as I can see.
I avoided fantasy comics growing up. It wasn't until I started talking with RJ, and then he started talking about Crom the Destroyer, that I was like, yeah, I got some Conan comics. But again, I always wanted superhero comics. So I don't think I have an authoritative answer about this, but I do think it's the same as a Western. It has to be the problem is solved through violence. You know what I mean? Like the Western isn't, you know, you got the home on the range, you got a range war going, and then they get a lawyer who arbitrates, and everybody goes away with a piece of paper in their hand. That's not a Western. A Western is somebody shoots and kills every person who ever crossed them. So I think a low barbarian, it has to be like one person just solves whatever dilemma comes up. It's going to be blood, and it's going to be violence. Although, like high fantasy, it could be magic, it could be trickery, it could be like the fates of the gods or whatever. But I think low fantasy is man, blood, sword, sinews, and violence saves the day.
Well, the great thing about low fantasy, I find, is the fact that, again, like the Robert E. Howard stories, there is so much, I don't know, there's so much difference in the stories, and you can pull in so much different stuff, because Across the Black River is basically a Western. Something like the Red Citadel, that's a horror story. Right. And you got the Tower of the Elephant is sci-fi, straight up sci-fi. Right. And you got all these different genres. He's throwing them left, right, and center at you with these different stories. And that's the great thing about low fantasy. You don't have to explain why this all exists in the same world. It's you're following this character, and you're absorbing this world. And that's, for me, that's the kind of thing that you need to get back to, and we need to get back to as writers, is because people are hungry for escapism, and the ability to immerse yourself into this huge world that is going to engulf you in a story that is going to, you know, absorb your entire attention, so that you want to be in this world. You want to know more about it. That's the essence of low fantasy, if you ask me.
I also think, just like a Western, because now I'm starting to realize, like, maybe low fantasy barbarian stories have a lot more in common with Westerns than I thought. But you don't need to explain the whole world, because unless your character is like a world traveler, like, you know, you make up, I don't know, Ugg the barbarian, he just knows the immediate area and where he grew up, and what did he travel 100 miles in his entire lifetime. So you don't need this grand scheme. Maybe there are elf castles and stuff like that over there, but you kind of just need a local story. And I
Agreed.
think you know, I think that's kind of visceral. Like, this guy's in danger, whatever, he's going to solve it over here. Whereas Elric of Melnibone, they're getting on dragons and flying across the world, and, you know what I mean, and spell castings, and which I love. You know, I love all that stuff. But I'm talking about like a low fantasy. I think it's more personal.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, because I always start my books. I used to say I always started like a man with no name or man with no name Western. It's, people, the thing about man with no name Westerns was the fact that everybody understood Westerns so much by the time that they started coming out that they didn't need to explain the backstory of what a Western is about.
Right.
You didn't even have to tell this guy's name. It's just you get thrown right in the middle of this story. And
But it was using tropes in the best possible way. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's that is all very interesting. And John, like, I wanted to kind of follow up on a point that you made about the connections between Westerns and barbarians, Westerns and Vikings. Like, I happen to agree wholeheartedly. And so the Viking anthology for us was a natural progression following the Western anthology, because a lot of the themes are exactly the same. I mean, you have the kind of westward expansion element of it from the Vikings. You have the violence element as expression of kind of moral. Violence is an expression of moral value. It is a problem solving tool. You have the kind of the independence aspect of it, kind of striking out to kind of make your own name.
Right. Do you think with minimal amount of work you could swap the settings?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And this is, again, I love having conversations like this because I never thought of this until I met you and we started talking about it. So I appreciate it.
Thematically, I think there's a lot of connectivity between at least the kind of the mythological American West and kind of how we think of the Vikings as well. I mean, it's in some ways it's almost identical in terms of a thematic kind of moral sense. The idea of an individual striking out on his or her own and violence as that tool to kind of achieve this sense of manifest destiny and westward expansion.
I think that's why the Western is such an American thing, because the American exceptionalism, the individual liberty, man against, the oppressor, whatever it is, government, local forces, weather, environmental, whatever.
Yeah.
Like that is, to me, like that's I up until the 70s, I think the Westerns were just like the quintessential American genre, and I think that evolved into detective stories, and I think superheroes are just the Western with powers. You know what I mean? Like, what's really the difference between Spider-Man solving problems with violence and the man with no name shooting everybody, except Spider-Man doesn't really kill, but I think, I don't know. And I think it's funny that Italy, of all places, is super big into Westerns.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's insane. I lived, so I had the pleasure of living overseas for a little bit. We lived in Germany for 3 years. And so traveled to Italy, traveled to France a lot. I mean, the French in comic books are ridiculous. Like,
yeah, the French, I think we're kind of moving towards a European model.
I think you're right. I mean, super, like, kind of almost reverse it, what you see in an American comic book store right now. And that's what you see in France. The superhero stuff is maybe 10, 15% of what's on the walls. The rest of it is Westerns, like stories about Rome, stories about ancient Greece, tons of crime noir. I mean, crime noir is huge there.
But what I'm talking about is like, Sean Fahey produces one big oversized thick hardcover book per year, but it's super quality.
Right.
You know what I mean? So people don't, and then you charge a pretty penny for it because it's worth it, as opposed to monthly. Let's grind out a Spider-Man comic every month. I'm sorry, comic book stores, but I don't think this. I think the monthly grind of floppies, as much as I love floppies, I don't see it continuing too much longer. I mean, it'll always continue in some form or another, but I just think it's going to diminish, like Galadriel, and move into the West. I'm just looking at Zach Dan. Yes, Tolkien is high fantasy. I'll explain it one day. Tolkien is high fantasy. It's just that Tolkien was very subtle about the magic. Almost everybody in Tolkien's world used magic through some form or another. It's just there was such a natural part of the world, they didn't consider it magic. Even Aragorn was a spellcaster. But this is Sean Fahey's time. I'm a big Tolkien freak.
I mean, how can you not be? Like, I to be honest, I don't think you can be I don't think you can be a serious writer of fantasy and not be a fan of
Yeah,
Tolkien.
he pretty much. Well, I know there was people before him, but he's the one that, like, made it what it is.
Yep, no
Yeah.
doubt.
So I see like all these, but you haven't really done science fiction. Is that anything that you're looking for?
Yeah, so a little bit in the Dark Matter anthology. So that's the Dark Matter has got some science fiction and some horror. So the stories are very much in the vein of either a Twilight Zone or an Outer Limits or an Alfred Hitchcock Presents type episode. So those anthology shows are kind of where that book draws from. The book that I am working on now that my artist is like physically coloring, finishing up the first chapter right now, has science fiction elements of it. It is a bizarre comic that, I mean, it draws from professional wrestling in the American South to the Iliad to Galaxy Quest to just it's kind of a crazy story that kind of Jack Kirby cosmic opera type stuff. And I think this is probably going to be the most science fiction-y type.
This isn't out yet. This is something you're working on.
Something we're working on right now.
What do you?
I didn't know how those elements fit together until you said.
Oh,
Jack
I'm
Kirby.
intrigued.
When you said Jack Kirby, everything just fits together.
Yeah, you had me at like Iliad and Southwestern Wrestling. I don't know why. I'm a big fan of Love and Rockets, and every once in a while they'll go into the Southwestern, wrestling circuit. When I lived in Albuquerque and that was on TV, I got totally wrapped up with it to the point when like Hellboy did that story with the luchadors.
Yeah,
so I keep toying with the idea of sooner or later I want to put the luchador character, but he's from the past. He's like in the 30s, Mexican wrestling from the 30s. I know people are going to call me on it. I'll make mistakes, so I'm kind of being, a little hesitant. But yeah, I love this. What's the name of this comic going to be?
So it's going to be called The Rage of Achilles, which is the name of the first chapter of the Iliad.
Yeah.
And the main character is a wrestler from Georgia whose stage name is Achilles.
Cool.
Yep. And
let me guess, he's a heel.
He's kind of like the Triple H figure of his league. So it depends on how you look at it. He's a heel to some, and he's a hero to others.
Cool.
I gotta ask you, Sean, do you have a favorite line from the Iliad?
Oh Jesus.
I'll give you mine while you're thinking. I always think I think it's Menelaus, and he's looking at the Spartans, and they're hanging back a little bit from the battle, and he goes, "Oh, Spartans, are you men?" And I'm thinking to myself, okay, you're talking to Spartans here, and you're asking them if they're men. What kind of leader is Menelaus? I mean, really, he must be as tough as nails.
Yeah. So in terms of favorite line, there's nothing that pops out off the top of my head, but I'll tell you, like I'm an atypical reader of the Iliad. I latch on to Odysseus. Most people I know,
my favorite too.
Yeah, most people I know are either Hector or Achilles. I am squarely in the Odysseus camp.
I always loved Odysseus. He's one of my favorites in Greek mythology.
He is he's the one that's most like us. He's the one that feels fear, feels shame. But it understands what true courage is, right? It's not about, racking up a body count. I mean, let's face it, Achilles, for all intents and purposes, is like Arnold Schwarzenegger in the first Terminator movie. He's just a pure killing machine. And, Hector is driven by his love of country and family. But Odysseus is squarely the everyman, in my opinion, right? He feels the type of fear that I think normal human beings fear. He feels the type of pride and survival instincts that normal human beings do. And the passages I like the most in the Iliad are the ones where Odysseus, his instinct is, this sense that they're about to lose. But what he fears more than anything else is disappointing his men, disappointing the people to the left and right of him. And that is what drives him. There are multiple times where he is convinced the Trojans are just going to obliterate them.
I also like he's the most realistic of them all.
Oh, 100%.
You know what I mean? He's just like, what are we doing?
Yep.
10 years, we, you know what I mean? Like, I got a kingdom. I got stuff I got to do.
I got to get back to my wife.
Right. Yeah. All right. We understand you. We swore an oath, but geez,
Yeah, I remember that exactly. I think it was when Odysseus was taking the men up to try to basically get some information on the enemies, and they have to sleep in the dark in their cloaks, and they're wrapping their cloaks around them, and they're talking about how the lice are basically just attached to them because they've been there for so long. I'm thinking to myself, yeah, this is a man who will give everything to try to get out of here, right? And an honorable way. Like, I want to win.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing at the end. He wants to get back to his wife. He wants to get back to his infant son. He wants to get back to his dog. Right.
I love that line that the lame dog lays on I don't know why it always stuck in my head, but the dog's laying on I can't remember the dog's name, but the dog perks up in here.
Argus. I think it's Argus. I think his dog's name is Argus.
And then the dog like wagged its tail and died or something like that. I was like,
right. But yeah, to your point, he knows that the Greeks have to win.
Right.
That it's been
enough playing around. We got to end this war. And that to me, that's what the Trojan horse was. I think he gets a bad rap. Like, people like, yeah, Odysseus and Loki would hang around. Like, there's nothing malicious. He's just like, dude, enough is enough. This is 10 years. And we're, this is the ancient world. I only got another 10 years left on the planet. We got to get, although the ancient Greeks tend to live 80 years or whatever, but you know what I mean? Like, let's get going. Let's move this along. All right. Enough with the honor. We got to do something and win and get home.
So, but I'll tell you my favorite line of the Odyssey, which is the first line,
the sequel.
Sing to me, O Muse, of the man of twists and turns. Right, and it says so much in just that first line right there about the journey that you're about to read about, and about the man that you're about to read about as well. It's just, it's a beautiful opening passage.
I always, again, connect my favorite line for the Odyssey with the one from the Iliad, which is, Odysseus's men, they say to Odysseus at one point, Odysseus, we are but men. You are made of steel, right? Because he has a steel will, because it is his will that they're talking about. He will not stop. And that's one of the things I always picture in my mind. I don't know if it ever is the case, but in my mind, I always go from Odysseus to someone like Doc Savage and as an inspiration of Superman,
Yeah. I'm a big fan. Now I want to go and reread all my Greek mythology. My wife and I were talking Greek mythology last night. So much of it.
Yeah, I've got a friend that he actually every January 1st he reads Edith Hamilton's mythology.
Oh, I love that book.
He starts the right thing. We're best friends now.
Yeah, every year he starts, and he gave me one of my friend Matt. He gave me one of his copies because he had several copies, of course, of Edith Hamilton's mythology. And he's like, January 1st, I always start again because it's the foundation of everything. Like, so much of what I will read over the next 12 months references back to this. This.
I don't know where, but there's a little hardcover copy of Edith Hamilton's. It was been in my bedroom since I don't know. I don't know if my brothers bought it or whatever, but I just found this in my room and I just read it over and over and over. It's probably my most reread book. So I couldn't read in second grade. In third grade is when I learned to read. So somewhere around fourth grade on, I read that over and over and over again, to the point that in college, that was like my pretentious thing. I'd buy my girlfriend's copies of these books, and none of them ever read it. They were like, "Oh, that's so nice." And then a week later, did you read it? No.
I don't know too much about my channel, Sean, but I focus on the traditional idea of a hero. And so I talk a lot about literature in different periods, and people usually email me every once in a while saying, can I have a book list of things to read to my children? And I always put Iliad, Odyssey, the Aeneid right there, almost at the top, right? These are children's stories. These are the pre-comic book stories that kids read before there were comic books, you
Right.
know, and I think people need to get back to those kind of. But I
100%.
mean, the Iliad is gruesome, but it's still to me very accessible to kids, and it's a story you should read to your children, if you ask me.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Everything, everything builds on it. Everything builds on Homer.
Yeah, definitely.
What do you guys think? Because I remember in college we would talk at like, did Homer write the Iliad and the Odyssey when they have such vastly different themes? Like you saying the Iliad was all about like, loyalty to your troops and your nation and duty, and then the Odyssey is about home. Get home. Nothing's better than home. And he said his premise was this could only come from two different eras. Maybe Homer was reciting them all, but originally they must have been like hundreds of years.
Yeah, so I've definitely my wife was a classics major in
Cool.
undergrad, and my older brother is a classics professor, and so I've heard this is a debate that is that's been had in the Fahey family. Did Homer exist the way that we think he did? Was Homer just someone that was collecting an oral tradition that had been passed down generations before him? Was Homer a number of people and just a name that was associated with kind of a tradition of collecting this lyrical poetry and kind of finally memorializing it? I think it's an interesting question. I think it's a very interesting question. I didn't know initially that the Iliad was performed like kind of as almost as a song, like it was sung.
It was
right?
sung, yeah. Recited, sung, yeah.
I always go back to the fact that, and I know it's disputed at some points, but the fact that I do believe that when they said they found the ruins of Troy, and because the guy followed the mythology, he followed the Iliad and the Odyssey, and
Is
he
it
followed
Herman Schliemacher? Herman Schliemacher, was it?
I don't remember his name off the top of my head. You'd be more familiar with the
I
name
think
than me.
that's it. Yeah,
but
he was
yeah,
amazing. Yeah, don't mean to cut you off, but this is a movie. This is a biopic that needs to get made, in my opinion. I think it was Herman Schliemacher. This guy taught himself loved the Iliad as a child, taught himself ancient Greek, and to what you were saying, kind of went back and used the text to try and figure out if there was in fact a Troy, right? And kind of using the markers that are alluded to in the Iliad to locate it. And now we know that there almost certainly was a Troy, and he discovered it.
Yeah, because it was always thought as just pure mythology before that.
Right.
Yeah, I think, I have you read the Robert Graves Greek mythology? Where every story is basically mushrooms. That's what every mythology. I read Robert Graves. Greek mythology. It gives you the myth, and then it gives his like explanation of what it means. And a lot of people argue with it, but I find it fascinating. But like Robert Graves, I believe that a lot of these myths have some sort of kernel of something. And I find it. Yeah, maybe there was like, and I don't believe it was fought over Helen of Troy. I think it was fought over trade routes to the Russian steppes or whatever, because Greece was a notoriously difficult place to grow food. You didn't have lush fields of grain, but beyond the Black Sea, you did. You had those big, beautiful steppes that, like the breadbasket to Attila the Hun and all those guys. So that's what I think. I think there really was this historic war, and then like telephone game, it became great. Like there probably was like a strong guy that was modeled. Like Hercules isn't his real name. I always forget Hercules' real name. But there probably was like, what's that?
Heracles.
No,
you want to go back to the Greek?
Well, yeah, there was Hercules the Roman, there was Heracles the Greek, but his real name was like Alcibiades or something like that. I forget what his real name is, but Hercules and Heracles are like his nicknames given to him by his dealings with Hera. But I always thought like maybe there was this like super strong construction worker guy, and next thing you know, 200 years later, we're talking about how strong this guy is, you know. And
Well, John, they used to box with brass knuckles. So really, what can you expect?
I tell you stories about my coworkers, their grandparents. One of them was a pit fighter in Hawaii before Hawaii was a state. He was 14, 15 years old, and they would, you know, this is like the 30s. They would literally in a pit with other kids beating each other unconscious, you know. And so he goes, so needless to say, John, I always did what my father told me because nobody, you know, just think about how barbaric the world was in the 30s. Just imagine the Mycenaean Greek era or the pre-Mycenaean Greek era. You know what I mean? Like, you know, the famous story of Chuck Dixon was being interviewed by Larry Hama to write Saga of the Savage Sword of Conan. And Larry Hama said to me, give me one word to summarize the world that Conan lives in. And Chuck Dixon said he thought that. He was panicking because Larry Hama was no nonsense. And he went, cruelty. And he went, you're hired.
Nice.
Yeah. And, you know, my wife and I were talking maybe about 2 weeks ago about how cruel the world was up until, I would say, like even the 1900s. Like, we lived in a cruel world. Charity is our modern. We are at the point where we can afford charity. Mm-hmm. You know, like the average person, you're lucky if they had shoes. If they had, like I was telling my cousin, we were arguing about the wealth. I was like, dude, in 1930, the average house in the world, including America, didn't have a floor. And now we're almost 100 years later, and like poor people still have flat screen TVs. Poor people are obese. You know, like we made remarkable progress in 100. Yeah, but it's not happening fast enough. And I'm like, well, then invite all the poor people to live in your house. What do you want me to tell you?
Yeah, I mean, your average person today. I have a good friend, my friend Matt, the one that gave me the copy, one of his copies of Edith Hamilton's Mythology. He would often say, your average person today lives better than kings did.
Yes,
kings 150 years ago. Yeah.
Yes. We have. Could you? You know, King George III, you know what I mean? Like, that guy didn't have toilet paper.
Right.
You know what I mean? That guy was sitting someplace freezing his ass off, pardon me, when it was time to go to the bathroom, you know what I mean? And we have toilet paper, you know what I mean? Like, we feel bad for people, like, oh man, you know, this guy can't afford cable TV.
Yeah, no, we've got refrigerators. Most families have two vehicles, 2 cars, you know, we can fly in planes. Air conditioning, you know, absolutely.
Yeah, you know, so I don't know. I don't know why this came from this conversation, but I love the way conversations evolve, like a river.
Here's where I think it came from, John, and this is where what I'd like to follow up with you on, because you're talking about kind of cruelty, barbarism, kind of how the world has changed, progressed. Do you think the world was more cruel and barbaric in the 1930s, or do you think it's cruel? Do you think it's more cruel and barbaric now?
I good question, because you could argue either point. I think in the Western world, yes, to the point where we delude ourselves into thinking that the rest of the world is good intentions, and then we're finding out that a lot of people that come here don't have this individual free. Like my whole thinking is the West created individual liberty. You know, maybe it came from ancient Greece and went into Europe and then into America. And this individual liberty, RJ will say, came like, you know, in the Middle Ages, maybe it blended with Christianity, the sanctity of life. You don't get that in China historically. Like right now, like the government says they repealed it, but like, you know, enforced infanticide or enforced abortion, whatever word you want to call them, that's the same thing. You know, you think in Africa there's like a sanctity of life, individual freedom? Like, I think yes, it is, but the rest of the world, no. So I think like Canada, the United States, Europe, I think we have like, we kind of live in this safe bubble, even without the words that, yeah, things are so nice, we want to help, you know, come on in here. And then we're like, oh, why are you attacking my baby?
Mhm.
Burning down this church over here. Oh, because you live in a non-Western world that doesn't have this subscription to individual liberty and sanctity of life. So I think the answer is twofold. It's a more complicated question.
It's a very complicated question. So my wife's mother. My wife was kind of a surprise baby. Her mother and father
Yeah,
actually.
we're 7 kids in my family. Yeah, my dad planned that. Yeah.
So her parents grew up in the Depression, and unfortunately they're both passed away now. But I remember her sitting around the dinner table and listening to her mother talk about growing up in the Depression in North Georgia and just how the community came together. No one had any money, and it was a farming community, and it was like, literally everyone had to come together to help everyone in the community out, and everything was communal. Dances, festivals, to the extent anyone had any free time because they were farming almost the entire day. It was kind of hanging out on folks' porches rotationally, like who had the radio or who
Right.
had a newspaper, right? Or just, a couple of folks hanging out. And so I don't know how it is with you, but I kind of live in McMansion world in Northern Virginia where no one talks to anyone.
Yeah.
There is no community.
I know the names of one of my neighbors.
Yeah. And so I think that's a different kind of cruelty and a different kind of barbarism. In some ways, I think we're almost kidding ourselves, and the world is far less civilized than it was 100 years ago.
That's what I mean. You could argue both sides, and I think both sides are right.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that is the right answer, John. Is that you can make an argument for either side on this one. It's a very complex question, but it's one that interests me quite a bit because it kind of goes to the core of a lot of the things that I write about, which man versus nature, barbarism versus civilization, kind of those thematic struggles, because they're loaded terms. They mean different things to different people.
Are you a professor?
No. I come from a family of professors, but I am not. I'm an attorney.
Okay.
It's good to know. I actually do legal research, or actually have a legal research company that, so we're kind of on the same page. But to speak to your point, I know exactly what you're talking about because right now, like basically I got rid of my company and I just live in a cottage in the woods because there's community here, right? And I
remember I said most people have regular floors. RJ still has the dirt floor. he doesn't like that newfangled stuff. And toilets inside the house, that's disgusting.
My parents grew up in a place where quite literally is what you're talking about. They had no electricity, no indoor plumbing. There was horse and wagon. That was it, and that was their existence until
my parents lived in an apartment in Brooklyn, a cold water flat. It didn't have hot water. Can you imagine that? Even poor people, you're not allowed to not give people heat. But back when my parents in Brooklyn, New York, were legally allowed to live in apartments, and the landlords didn't have to provide hot water because it was cheaper.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, and that was my parents. So yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off, but yeah, the world has changed. Could you imagine if you had friends that told you we live in an apartment building that's legally allowed to not give us heat in the summer and in the winter? So yeah, I don't know. Sometimes the world is changing. I don't know. The average person is what was the last time you saw a skinny homeless person?
Right.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, RJ. This is one of my hot topics.
No problem. But I'm always I'm very odd in the fact that I quite honestly think that the pinnacle of civilization was the medieval period. A lot of people think that we're the pinnacle of civilization and the ancients are just slightly behind us and the medievals are way the heck back. I think the exact opposite. I think the medievals were the pinnacle and the ancients were behind them and we're limping way behind with a broken leg, because I know that you probably weren't going to live past 30, but imagine living in a place where you felt totally and absolutely secure, where, you had a community around you that you knew everybody and you know, you were passing down things from one generation to another that, you know, was secure. And we do hear a lot of things about, you know, I, as a history buff, you know, always go and read about wars and levying troops and all that kind of thing. But those are very, very different and rare things as compared to today, with the amount of war and the huge capacity for it. And I was even, you know, I'm with you. I always go back to the Iliad in my mind. I was just talking to someone this morning, a guy, we are talking about the Second World War, and how the Germans were treating people and prisoners. And I thought to myself, that sounds an awful lot like what happened at the end of the Iliad, where they're throwing children and women off of the walls, because, you know, they didn't want these people to come back and revenge themselves on for their fathers and stuff like that, right? And I think that you know, we've gotten into the neo-pagan culture where our civilization is beginning to crumble around the edges. So, and to have the security of a village and people who understand you, and you know, that's why I am where I am. You know, I meet these people every Sunday, and you know, I know their names and we talk, and it's beautiful.
I don't want to get political now, but I think that's one of the lockdown got us used to being sitting in the house watching TV. You know. I want to ask you, Short. You said your whole family is like academics. What do they think of comic books in general?
So,
you know, are you the weird redheaded stepchild? Oh, this guy's making comic books.
No, so yeah, right. So, you know, like I was saying at the beginning, I mean, we all love storytelling, and we're all movie geeks, and you know, fiction geeks, and so we all love storytelling and really kind of any format. And I'm trying to think if there's anyone in the family that kind of dismisses the whole comic book thing, and I cannot think of anyone. Everyone thinks it's kind of cool. Like, everyone in my family is kind of a nerd in their own way, if that makes sense. I mean, my older brother is a classics professor. My younger brother is actually a television writer. You know, we each do our own kind of writing. I mean, my older brother does a lot of writing about kind of the classical period, you know, with a focus on Rome. My younger brother, you know, he was on Spartacus for a little bit. He was on.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
a writer.
Yeah, and so he was on the CW prequel to Walker that was kind of took place in kind of the traditional American West. So we've always kind of gravitated around storytelling within the genres that we love. We just kind of, the three of us have just kind of picked different ways to approach it.
I always think of when I was studying history and classics, to me, it was the storytelling. To me, it was because I was reading a story, and it was a beautiful story, you know, and I got into classics professors, books, people like F.M. Cornford and things like that, who go back to, you know, let's explore stories. And, you know, I love that kind of way of looking at history. And it does feed into the great man history as well. You know, let's tell a story of a great man.
I always history was always my favorite top subject at school. I always used to say it's a great story. And I remember going to history class, and I had teachers like, okay, memorize this date, this, and it just became like just rote memorization. It was so freaking dull. And I remember, I think it was 10th grade, I had this one teacher, you know, and he was a good looking teacher. All the girls loved him, and he always wore a suit and tie, even though all the other teachers looked like just a student but older, you know. And he would come in, and he would turn off the lights, and he would say, like, just put your pens down and listen. And he would just tell, like, I remember he just told us the French Revolution as if it was just, we were riveted. I could still give a lecture on the French Revolution from this guy just sitting on the desk. You know, he had this like cool Sylvester Stallone voice, you know, so he was like, yeah, and then and I'll never forget that class over the other guy that was like, you know, the tenured important teacher, you know, 1692, Columbus held it was just rote memorization of facts. And then this teacher, at the end of every class, he would hand out notes. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I didn't really need the notes because I had these stories. Like I could tell you about Spider-Man 143 that I read 40 years ago because it was an entertaining story. And I remembered, we could all recite Star Wars. So I didn't need these. I don't need notes to tell you what happened in Star Wars. I enjoyed it. It was a good story. So the French Revolution became a great story that took a week to tell, So, I just get so mad when people are like, I hate history. I'm like, what do you hate stories?
Right.
How do you?
It's interesting. Like, this is going to sound weird to probably to hear, but the best law professors that I had were the ones that focused more on the facts of the individual case than the black letter law, because they knew that you're going to remember the facts more easily than you're going to remember the black letter law, and then from the facts you'll be able to extrapolate the law, and more importantly, its applicability to similar type situations. So the best law professors I certainly ever had were the ones that really, really like focused on the story, if you will, the story of the individual case, because they knew that was it certainly is the best way to kind of instill those principles, is to see how they apply.
Only there was people that were interested in true crime. My sister and her 5 daughters, it's Saturday night, we got nothing to do. They all sit there in their pajamas, they make popcorn, and they're watching about people getting murdered. So yeah, people love this. That's a really good one. You were talking about making a Detective Comics. I was going to ask you this before, but I got distracted. I would love to do a crime comic, but I find that to be super difficult.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. I would love, like, personally, I think they're all difficult, and but crime in particular. So I'm a big Dashiell Hammett guy, Raymond Chandler. I love James Ellroy. I love Richard Stark, John McDonald, all these guys, and I think I might be able to construct a decent plot, but there's the language piece, right? There's such a poetry, like good crime fiction. There's such a poetry to almost every single line in it. I thought Brian Azzarello and Ed Brubaker did this exceptionally well.
Yeah.
And I know Darwin Cook was adapting
the Parker
Stark's works when he was doing the Parker, but that it wasn't a literal word for word translation there. He brought a lot of himself into that. And if you read some of his Catwoman stuff, there's a lot of noir in that too. And I thought he was a great noir comic book writer. And those 3 individuals, Brubaker, Azzarello, and Cook, were such artisans in the way that they made almost every single word count on multiple levels, right? And I'm with you, John. It's something I would want to do, but I don't. Maybe one day I'll challenge myself and see if I can do it.
Because I've been criticized. I kind of catch flack for this, but I keep saying there hasn't been a Batman live action movie yet. None of Michael Keaton, none of these guys were Batman. No fault of the actors, because they're, to me, Batman is a stealthy, sneaky guy who solves crimes and then fights if he has to. Right. When you're wearing a suit of armor and using machine guns to take out the Penguin's henchmen and bombs and absorbing bullets, you're Iron Man. And then when you power through, so to me, there hasn't been a Batman, like the animated series to me is the best version of Batman in on TV or whatever.
Right.
So I want to write what I consider this is how Batman should be, and I think I bit off more than I could chew, because it has to be a crime. You know what I mean? And it's really difficult.
It's funny, Sean, you should talk about the law professors and then move into this, because the reason why I could stomach the mind-numbing legal research was because I always thought of it as a puzzle. I was like, I'm trying to solve a puzzle, right? And to me, that would be the best way of that's the way I write stories. And it would be, I think, the way that you write true crime is, you're taking the legal work that you have in front of you and then draw a story out of how the puzzle connects together. That, to me, that is the way the true crime should be written best.
I agree. And kind of connecting those two threads, and about Batman and problem solving and puzzles. Did you guys read Tom King's Human Target miniseries?
No, I didn't.
I only read the one issue.
Okay, it's actually fantastic. It's one of the probably one of the better recent comics that I've read in a long time. So very very noir, but each individual issue not only focuses on obviously the main character and kind of the mystery of his own death, and this is not giving anything away because he's poisoned, and this is page 1, like he's poisoned,
Right.
and he's
That's
trying
the
to
human
figure
target.
out who poisons him, and it's someone in the Justice League International that is going to be the prime suspect, and so each individual issue kind of focuses on a different character within that has been in the Justice League International, and there's a Batman issue which is fantastic, and it's one of the best interpretations of what Batman represents I think I've read in a long time, because it talks about this in the shadows detective problem solving, kind of the threat of Batman, the idea of Batman, what Batman represents, rather than the suit of armor, the fists, the punching. Yeah.
It's like, to me, like, if Batman's standing in front of you and you're shooting him with a gun and he's just standing there, that's not Batman. Batman never would have been in front of you in the first place. Batman is, where is he? And then a hand comes from behind you.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then that guy goes to shoot Batman and you see his cape turn in the corner. He's not going to stand there and fight 42 guys. He's going to take you out. And then 20 minutes later, he's going to take RJ out. And then he's going to save me for last because I'm the best.
Totally agree. And so, like, if you have the time, I would recommend Tom King's Human Target. It's like I said, I think the whole thing is great. I love noir. I love crime. And this is very much a noir type story.
Now, a flip side of this is I want to write something funny. And I find comedy to be the most difficult, because to me, it's timing. And how do you capture timing? How do I control the timing in panels? And I think I'm funny. You know, I get laughs when I'm talking to people, but I can't get it on paper and then have Renzo draw it and have so I haven't tried yet. I wrote one joke. I'm working on, my second issue is there's one joke in it. If people tell me that joke was funny, I'll put a third joke in the next issue.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So
that's why I got Don Chin to write the backup story for Thomas Valiant #2, because I wanted a funny story, and I know I can't be funny on the page. I just can't. I don't have the chops for that right now. So Don Chin
I have Don Chin again. Everything RJ does, I steal it. Don Chin is going to be doing a funny strip in my second issue of my comic too.
Yeah, because I don't know if you know John Chin. He did parody comics as far back as the '80s. He did Radioactive Hamsters as a parody comic for what was it? Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But he also did Enchanter, which is a beautiful fantasy book. Who's the artist on that, John? I can't remember.
Mike Tritchberg.
Yes.
Who got sniped away and worked with Neil Gaiman on Sandman.
Yep.
So it kind of sabotaged his comment. I don't think he's not bitter at all. Not at all.
Don is not a bitter man. Don is the most cheerful guy I've met in a long time.
Oh man. So what, because you're talking about all these different genres, you got sci-fi coming up. What is something that you're like, nah, I can't do that, or I don't want to do that, or?
Yeah. I mean, we talked about it a little bit. So noir crime is something I would love to do, but I just don't think I'm there yet.
Yeah.
Like, I think I need
that is all about timing also.
Yeah. If I was going to do it, I would probably do an anthology first to see if I could do an 8 to 10 page or a couple of 8 to 10 pagers before trying to do kind of long form on that. So that's something that, like, I had one idea. So I'll tell you about the crime noir story that I had. This is in the notebook of potential future ideas. So this is a British noir, takes place during World War II, during the Blitz. And the main character is kind of an Irish/IRA type bomber guy that's on the sidelines because Britain's fighting Germany, and he's quote unquote retired, but English criminal element recruits him to open up, blow up some bank vaults, and their cover stories, they're going to break into banks while the blitz is going on. So while the bombs are dropping, that's when they're blowing their way into banks.
That's another brilliant idea.
And so kind of the twist is, well, like, why are they always so lucky with their timing? Like, what is it? Like, why do they always, someone in the organization always seems to know exactly when
one of them's a Nazi spy or something, a saboteur.
Right. So that's kind of my
great
noir story that I'm toying around with. But again,
I'm excited for your comics. I'm gonna go check to see if they got here yet. You remember the Jetsons? They put the letter in the mailbox.
Sean, I'm working on a book right now. It's called Fade to Blue. We have the first issue ready to go. The second issue, we're almost done. It's basically they're size of floppies, so they're 22 pages, 24 pages. But it's I always say film noir mixed with Indiana Jones, in the fact that it's set in the Depression, and the fella basically is roped into a supernatural world that he never knew existed, and has to, try to figure out his role in this entire thing. But I was just bringing it up because I think that, again, the best way to do film noir is black and white. And you have black and white artists, beautiful black and white artists there with the Saga of the Northman. And I always, I got my artist, and he does beautiful things with shadow and light. I go back to the ideas of Will Eisner. He's saying shadow and light. The only other medium that even comes close to comic books, he says, is stage plays for shadow and light. You can use them spectacularly, and especially you're listening to a guy who did all of his early work in black and white. So I think there is a call for that kind of thing, especially right now with the fact that you have so many people reading manga, which is black and white, to get them into reading more North American comics, to go in that direction. And the film noir is the key to beautiful black and white comics.
I have a detective character, Augie Carmichael, and he's a big, fat, disgusting blob. He's inspired by Harvey Bullock, from the Batman. I just love that guy who, he buttons his shirt and he misses it, and he wears a clip-on tie, but he's brilliant. And he always says, trust my gut. I trust my gut. My gut's never wrong. And he always smells like alcohol.
Right.
So people like, this guy's a drunk. This guy, and the commissioner's like, but he's always right. And he's always like, trust my gut. Trust my gut. Well,
that's a great line. That's a great line for that type of character.
But I don't want to spoil it. So in issue 4 of my comic, you're going to find out why trust his gut. And I'll tell you, his name is Augustus Carmichael. And that is the biggest clue. And you being into classical mythology, what did the augurs do?
What did the augurs do?
Yeah, the augurs, the Roman augurs.
They're the fortune tellers.
Right. How did they read the fortunes?
They read the entrails of
and the bones.
Animals.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not going to spoil it any more than that. But but that's, Augie Carmichael came back from his trip from Greece, gained 100 pounds, and tells everybody to trust his gut.
I like it.
Well, guys, I want to continue on with this conversation, but we've been going for an hour and a half.
Yeah,
usually we cap it at an hour because we want to keep people coming back for more. But Sean, I would love to have you back sometime. This was
a lot of fun.
Yeah, a lot of fun is an understatement. Thank you very much. If you want to give everybody in the chat who came in early a little bit of a breakdown of your books and where they can find them, that would be great. And hopefully we can get you some more sales.
Yeah, absolutely. You want me to just do the 30-second spiel again? And
you go right ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the folks that came in late, Sean Fahey, editor, primary writer at Blackjack Press. We do comics, Western comics, sci-fi horror comics, fantasy comics. We have an anthology series called Tall Tales of the Badlands, which is a Western series, an anthology series called Sagas of the Northmen, which is a Viking series, an anthology called Dark Matter, which is a sci-fi horror. And then our most recent book is a standalone original graphic novel called The River of Blood, which is a Lovecraftian, Robert E. Howard, Mike Mignola inspired a story about a group of Varangian Guard mercenaries that have to flee Constantinople. And on their trip up the Volga River in medieval Russia, they encounter all kinds of supernatural mischief. And then if you're a fan of Eaters of the Dead, it kind of follows a similar type of model. Village in despair. Some Northmen that are proud folks and want to help some folks out. Try to rescue the village and encounter a lot more than they anticipated. Borrows heavily from the Odyssey, Heart of Darkness, a little bit of Macbeth, and you can find our books if you like your books in the digital format. Drive Through Comics, and then print on demand through Indie Planet Kablam. We're on Blackjack Press is on Twitter and Facebook. Trying to get more aggressive with the social media, so updating with page previews of our books, and we'll start rolling out some previews of our new book, The Rage of Achilles, probably in the next couple of months or so. Almost done with the first chapter. Artist is starting to block out and do sketches for the second chapter now, so we'll probably start a Kickstarter sometime in 2025. So more to follow there. Thank you guys both for the time. This was a fantastic conversation. I had a lot of fun, and I had a lot of fun.
I'd like to invite you back on after I read your comics. Tell you how much
please.
you hate them.
Anytime. You just let me know, and I'll be there.
Also, just some people were asking about where they could see some of your stuff. I think you're at Blackjack Comics on Twitter, is it?
Blackjack Press. Yeah, Blackjack Press on Twitter. So Blackjack Press on Twitter and Facebook. And I'm trying to, the past 2 months or so, I've been trying to get be a lot more aggressive and posting some actual interior pages from the books. Indie Planet is really good.
So I'll retweet all your stuff. Not that I have a lot of influence, but
every
help, every drop helps. And the lady as she peed into
absolutely appreciate it. Indie Planet is really good. They'll do I think a 5-page preview of every book. It'll show 5 pages of interior art there. But yeah, trying to get a lot more aggressive in terms of posting interior art. I mean, the covers are great, but you want to make sure you're you know what you're buying too. So we'll be certainly posting a lot more interior art on both the Twitter page for Blackjack Press and the Facebook page for Blackjack Press.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And like I said, we're going to have you back on because this was just a spectacular time. And we went an hour and a half and I didn't even notice going by. And you just talked about Hamlet. And now I want to talk about Hamlet for another half an hour. But anyways, thank you very much for showing up. Thank you very much.
Construction work. I know stuff. I know a few things.
Yeah. You certainly do, John. So thank you very much for
fun. Nice meeting you, Sean. This was a blast. Really enjoyed
great meeting you too. Thank you very much.
And I want to thank everybody in the chat as well. So I will see everybody on my weekend video, and we will be on John's channel next week for Comic Book Team Up, and I will be doing my Make Comics Great Again after that next Wednesday. So I'll see everyone there, and thank you everyone for showing up. All right, bye.
Bye-bye.